How many of you came walking today? Raise your hand if you walked to here. How many of you biked? How many of you took cars, drove cars? How many of you took transit? How many of you walked and took cars? Walk and transit. You know, one of the things is, the reality is that we got to mix all of these things. Like, it's not one or the other, but it's a mix. We're talking about mobility. It's not about cars or bikes or walking or whatever. It's about mobility. And the reality is that we're going to go and get eggs or milk and we're just walking. It's just 200 meters. We're going to walk. If we're going to do more than 500 meters, maybe we bike. If we're going to go even further away, then we take transit. If we're going to go to Kelowna for the weekend, we drive. So each mode has a different purpose. So this is not, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Plus, for example, walking. Every trip begins and ends by walking. Even the people that use their cars, they walk to the car, they walk from the car. People walk to transit, people walk to their bikes, and so on. And actually, someone said this morning, oh, Gil, today it's going to rain. So then that's why we don't walk too much in Vancouver. Well, actually, you do walk in Vancouver, but it's because of the weather. We use the weather as an excuse. And that reminded me that, last year in January, I was working in Cuba for the Canadian government. And in Cuba, people were telling me, Gil, you see, we cannot walk because it's too hot. Or bike. And then I got on the plane, and it was January, and I got into Canada, and then they said the same thing, but it's too cold. So in many, many ways, can we get this screen on? The screen? So in many, many ways, it's about change. So if we're going to go running, and it's plus 25 degrees, then we use one clothing. If we're going to go at minus 26, then we use a different kind of clothing. So at the end of the day, like our Danish friends, they say, there is no such thing as bad weather. It's bad clothing. So, if we got the proper clothing, we can do it in the summer. Well, we just heard about Ottawa and how people bike in the middle of the winter. So they just go on and so on. So it is very important. So it's about change. What we're really talking here about is how to change. And I know that in Calgary, sometimes we see the people plowing the snow on the trails on their bikes. And they are changing, and they move into other modes. And I was really excited because then now we see non-motorized snow plowing. And I say, wow, now we're really moving in the right direction. But then I saw, this last Sunday, I got the Toronto Star, and I see on Sunday the top toys for the summer. And I get excited, and I say, what's going to happen? And I was coming, yesterday I was in Kelowna doing a presentation on a session on transportation for families with children from 0 to 6. Very, very exciting. So I said, top toys for the summer. This is great for my conference in Kelowna. But then all of a sudden I realized that the title was, who says boys should have all the mini car fun? And this is the top toys. My God, the new Disney Princess Dodge Viper. Can you imagine how horrible? This is the top toy for the summer. My God, the girls want to have the same fun as the boys. They got to do what the boys are doing now. The other day I was biking on the trail along the Ontario Lake, and I saw this kid, TV sucks. Ride your bike. So I said, you mind if I take your photo? This is fantastic. And then we got someone that was elected in Toronto who says, what I compare bike lanes to is swimming with the sharks. Sooner or later, you'll get bitten. And the same person then went on and said, roads are built for buses, cars, and trucks, not for people on bikes. In addition, this is fueling up that fight that is not doing anybody any good. In addition to being very ignorant, because we have streets for thousands of years. We have been building cities for 5,000 years, thousands of years before there were even cars. So, but this doesn't help anybody. In 1890, the American Wheelmen had over 120,000 members. Can you imagine an organization that has a cycling organization with 120,000 members when there was no internet, when there was no TV, when there was very hard to connect? And they had over 120,000 members. And then actually they are the ones that actually help. The first streets that were paved in the States were paved for cyclists, not for cars. And actually, work with the CAA, the American Automobile Association was born out of this. So actually, out of this organization, they split in two in the early 1900s, and then they created the League of American Cyclists and the American Automobile Association. You know, and children have been playing on the streets for years, So this kind of things doesn't help anybody. He says, oh, my heart bleeds when someone gets killed, when he was asked about cyclists, but it's their own fault at the end of the day. He said it on a formal meeting of city council. Who does this help? This doesn't help anybody. On top, so this is why I'm so grateful to the Canadian Automobile Association to organize this meeting and for people to share ideas, to talk about these things, and because, you know, how to find constructive solutions for everybody. And the BCAA, they're having wonderful hosts as well as everybody else. And by the way, I got a suggestion. You know, this logo, the CAA, eventually could turn into this, CMA. So it could be the Canadian Mobility Association. And then we got this wonderful cover story, you know, the Spring magazine, and it's great because it has the pedal power, it has changing lanes, and on top of that, it also talks about cycling and golf and food and gardening and so many of these things. It's about mobility. You know, 3 years ago in Toronto, the car share program had 2,000 members. Now it has 22,000 members. So mobility is changing very, very fast, and it's going to continue to change. 2 years ago, I was invited to a think tank by Bill Ford, the chairman of the Ford Motor Company. And there was like 14 or 15 of us in Michigan. And he said, you know, 50 years from now, historians are going to think that Americans were crazy in 2010. That how will they understand that we were spending 25% of our income on something that they were using 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and that was parked over 23 hours a day? He said, no one will understand that. So he was saying that even within the Ford now, they don't call themselves a car company, but they're in the mobility business. And he said, transportation is going to change in so many ways that we cannot even think of. He says, same thing as the public bicycles. He said, there might be public cars. And things like that. So things are changing. So when you are changing, you know, I always like to ask the children, you know, and whether we're doing work in Sydney, Australia, or in Seoul, Korea, or in Mexico, we ask the children, you know, what do you dream? How would you like your community to be like when you are your parents' age and you have children of your own age? And here, for example, look at this. Anne Hafover drove in his park. And Edgar, he's only 13, but he said he wanted a city with fewer cars and more people walking and more people cycling. And then he drew an area for pedestrians, for cyclists, for buses, and for cars. Edgar is only 13, but he knows that if we mix pedestrians and cyclists, the pedestrian is going to get injured. If we mix cyclists and buses and cars, the cyclist is going to get injured. So each one needs their own separate space. And then Edgar drew public parks and low buildings with street-level activity. You know, in November, I was in Seoul, Korea with the PhD students at the National University, and I told these guys, hey, I hope that you study very, very hard, because now the 13-year-olds can summarize Urban Planning 101 in one drawing. If we have community like this, it will be, so when people say, oh, it's not rocket science, no, it's not. It's probably not rocket science. You know, maybe rocket science is actually moving from talking to doing. And that's what we're going to be doing this afternoon, is coming up with ideas. That's why I'm so excited. I want to thank the Canadian Automobile Association for inviting me, as well as everybody else, to this meeting. And people say, Gil, you know, why is it 8 to 80 cities? What do you mean? And they say, is it about just walking and cycling and public places? And I said, well, part of it is that, but walking or cycling or public places, that's just a means. It's not the end. The end is how to create vibrant cities with healthy communities where people are going to be happier enjoying their public places. So at the end of the day, and when we're providing our services, people ask, you know, can I send my kids walking to school? Can I send my grandparents cycling to the park? Can we go on a bike to get eggs or milk? And I said, look, you don't have to be a PhD in engineering. All you really need is a simple rule, 3 steps. Step number 1, think of an 8-year-old that you really love, your son or daughter or nephew or grandchild. Once you have that boy or girl in your mind, then go to step number 2. Think of an older adult that you also care for. And then when you have the child and the older adult in your mind, then step number 3, would you send them to get eggs or milk or to go to the park or to go to the school? If you would, it's because it's safe enough. If you would not, it's because it's not, and you gotta do it better. You know, the reality is, what if everything that we did in our public places, everything that we did for cycling, every single cycling infrastructure had to be fantastic for the 8 and the 80-year-olds. The same thing for pedestrians, the same thing for cars, the same thing for public transit. We gotta change. You know, we gotta stop building cities thinking that everybody's 30-year-old and athletic. We gotta build cities for everybody, you know, and that's the 880 rule, and that's where the 880 cities come from. That's what we're gonna be talking about. And I know I criticize a little bit some of the things happening in Toronto, but I love Toronto, you know, and actually that's where I chose to live and work and play. And only, obviously, and it's not that I say I love Toronto. I've been invited recently, for example, to work with Gehl Architects, to move over to Copenhagen. But no, I said, no, I'd rather be a senior consultant, but I will stay living in Canada. I love Canada. Same thing with Project for Public Places in New York. They invited me to New York. But I think there are so many great things happening in Canada. And of course, I love Vancouver as well. I mean, when you got the transportation, you know, the engineering services doing these green services, and when you got these beautiful, I mean, you just go out and take a look at this scenery. It looks like a magnificent postcard. And then, so Vancouver is fantastic. You go to the parks and you see all of this public art where the children actually use the art. It's not art to look at, but art to enjoy. So obviously you gotta look. And actually, every time that I come to Vancouver, I have a 20-minute test. Within the first 20 minutes, I always say, my God, you know, this is the place where I should be living. Sometimes it's in the first 5 minutes, sometimes in the first minute, but it's never taken me more than 20 minutes. But, oh, what a wonderful city. But nevertheless, all across Canada, we seem to be facing a perfect storm. You know, we got population growth, and we got a climate change, and we got obesity crisis, and we got economic crisis, and all of it seems to be coming at the same time. So how do we deal with this? You know, part of it is, you know, the Canadian population is going to grow by 6.5 million people in 25 years. And sometimes we say, well, what's 6.5 million people? Well, 6.5 million people is the same as the 5 largest cities. So it's like if we were going to build these 5 largest cities in 25 years. You know, it's in the extended GTA area, we got 7.5 million people. We're going to grow to 11.2. So we're going to grow by 50%. You know, if we had a magic wand and we could redo half of Toronto, even the best half, we would do it even better. Well, that's the opportunity that we have in all these cities to improve them. So not only do we have to improve the cities that we got today, but we got to create great cities for these 3.7 million additional people. So that's one of the wonderful things that we can do, and that's what, part of the role that the CAA is playing by getting all of us together to think, how do we want to live? You know, and then we talk about the war on the car. You know, what is this, the war on the car? You know, when I'm flying over Toronto and I see all of these highways, new ones over and over, I say, what war on the car? There is no war on the car. I mean, and then war on the car is over. There were his first words when elected, and you say, what war on the car? You know, it's, in Toronto, we did a transit plan, nothing more than a plan. Nothing has been done in the last 10 years, you know. Pedestrian, we do a one innovation, we do a crosswalk, a rumble, and when you do a pilot project, if it works, then you do 20 or 30 more. No, we did it 6 years ago, and there's only one additional one done. So, you know, here, this is, actually this is from our office on Spadina. That lane was repainted, now there's not even a lane. Finally, we took away 2 cars and put a bicycle parking. Now that one is gone too. So what war on the car? There's no war on the car, at least not to benefit people walking. You know, by the way, pedestrian collisions in Toronto reported to the police. You know, 1 pedestrian gets hit by a car every 4 hours. Every 4 hours. We just had an election a few months ago. None of the politicians were talking about the pedestrians. And there is a pedestrian hit 1 every 4 hours. Can you imagine? So in Canada, there are twice as many pedestrians killed as homicides by firearm. Nevertheless, there is a homicide by firearm, and it's all over the news for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the only way that a pedestrian is on the news is if it's a mom pushing a stroller. Other than that, it's forgotten. No one talks about it. On the back of the newspaper, a small note says, an unfortunate accident. No, most of those are not unfortunate accidents. Most of those could have been avoided. So, you know, and walking can and should be safe. And then we know what to do. We got to reduce the speed limit. We got to stop cutting corners, and we got to make 90-degree corners, and we got to have better lights and so on. So we know what to do. So what in the car? What is this word? Now let's talk about bicycles. What are we doing? In Toronto, we don't have 1 single meter of protected bikeway. So what is the word on the car? I mean, you would have think by all the talk of the word on the car that we would have a fantastic infrastructure, We have been doing a few things nice to do, like bike parking. We got rings all over the place, and bicycle lockers, and a bicycle station. And now 2 weeks ago, we got Bixi. But all of these are things that are nice to have, but are not going to create a major change. I do think that if you need people to substantially increase cycling, you got to have a bicycle infrastructure. You got a bicycle grid. All of these, people can do it without the government having to do it. If you don't have bicycle parking, you tie your bike around a tree or a post. If you don't have a bicycle, then you buy a used bike. You go to a garage sale and you buy one for $20, whatever. None of this is going to make a major difference. What's really going to make the major difference is if we have a bike. A PhD from Oshawa, he says that a bikeway does not exist in isolation, but rather it is part of a bicycle network. This is very, very important because many times the municipalities, they do 1 or 2 kilometers and no one is using it. And they said, we don't have a bicycle culture. Well, if that bicycle net doesn't connect anything with anything, people are not going to use it. Same thing would happen with the cars. If you build roads that do not connect anything with anything, you build 1 kilometer here, another kilometer there, and you could not go anywhere in your car in a safe way, then people would not, and they would say, we don't have a car culture either. So the reality is that if you're going to do 20 soccer fields, for example, you can do 1 this year, 3 the next, none the following, because each soccer field is independent of each other. But when you're going to do a bikeway, if you don't have a grid, people are not going to use it. And I know that it's different. On the neighborhoods, we have to slow down the traffic. But on the arterials, we got to create a network. So let's never talk about, because talking about bikeways is like we're going to talk about an arena for hockey, but we only have the area around one of the goals. How are you going to play hockey like that? You cannot play. So those are the things. From cyclists, there is 1 cyclist hit every 7 hours and 35 minutes. And according to the numbers we just saw this morning, in BC, is 1 every 9 hours. Can you imagine? And this is much worse than the pedestrians. Why? Because the pedestrians is 1 every 4 hours, but everybody's pedestrian. 100% of the population is pedestrian. So this is in a city where only 2% of the people are cyclists, and nevertheless there is 1 cyclist hit every 7 hours by a car. And then they say, cyclists live 110. This came out of a car that was parked on the bike lanes, right on the bike lanes. And then when the cyclist was passing, they opened the door, they hit the cyclist went over and was killed. All they got is a fine for the car driver for stopping on the bike lane, and for the person that opened the door for opening the door without watching the cars. And then you say, my God, what is going on? Can you imagine? I mean, riding bicycles can and should be made safe. We got 1,155 bicycles were in a collision last year. If only 2% of the share in Toronto is cycling and 40% is cars, what would happen? What if all of a sudden we had 23,000 car drivers injured, or 1 every 22 minutes? Don't you think that this would have been the #1 topic in any political discussion? But all of a sudden, it seems like the cyclists or the pedestrians are orphans. No one really cares until it's your spouse or your kids or your parents, and then all of a sudden. So we really got to work on those. But now, one of the things that I really like about the cars is that they got a very small rear view mirror and a very big windshield. So we got to spend more time looking forward than looking back. But I needed to put some of the things into context. One of the myths looking forward is that people say, the bicycle infrastructure is only about painting lines on the arterials. No, painting doesn't work anywhere in the world. This is Kentucky, or this is some place in Europe, and this is Christchurch in New Zealand, this is New York. This is Toronto near my office, and this guy was almost killed. And you said, where's the driver of the car? He was buying a hot dog. And then when you're on a bike and all you have between you and an SUV is a painted line, then you go on the sidewalk and the pedestrian is injured. So we got to have some physical separation. We got to make it safe for everybody. So that it's safe for the pedestrian, for the cyclist, for the car drivers, for everyone. And we got to think of the worst case scenario. let's not think about 10 o'clock in the morning, Sunday mornings. No, let's think about at night. And, you know, for example, this, you're going on a car, you open the door, it's safe. That's why they got this space between the cyclists and the cars, so that you can get in. We got to make it safe for everybody. So this is some of the things that they're doing in many places. You got to be safe for the 8-year-olds and safe for the 80-year-olds and create, you know, this is in Paris. In the last 5 years, they've been building safe bikeways all over Paris, wonderful. 8-meter wide sidewalks, and they got the bikeway physically separated. You got to move the parked cars. You're going to see everywhere where there's safe cycling, you got the pedestrians, then the cyclists, then the parked cars. Because in these places, the parked cars protect the cyclists. In Toronto, we got the cyclists on the other side protecting the parked cars. And it's really scary when you are cycling, and on one side, you got to watch out for the car opening the door, and on the other side, you got the cars going. We got to make it safe for everybody, for the car drivers too. This is a floating bridge and so on. These are other interesting things that are happening. Sydney. In Sydney, used to have bike lanes here, and they're changing for this kind of infrastructure. All of a sudden, they make it separate. It's on the left because in Sydney, they drive on the other side and so on. This is Mexico City. So in cities all over the world where they want to have something safe. Montreal, you know, and as you can see from Bonjac, this is very recent. But all of a sudden, in Montreal, they're doing a lot of interesting things, and now you see a lot of many more. Someone said this morning that women were a reference point. It is. You know, for example, in places in New York, they said, oh, you know, the women, they don't want a bike. Well, when they went to the streets with only a painted line, then 85% were men, 15% were women. But when they go to the bike along the Humber River, then all of a sudden it's 55% women and 45% men. So it is an indicator when things are safe. Look what they're doing in Montreal. It's really nice, and every time that you go, there's new ones and new ones and new ones that they're improving, and Velo Quebec is doing a great job promoting it. And, you know, if they do it, why not everywhere else? Vancouver, you know, the mayor, Gregor Robertson, and his team and the things that they're doing. Actually, I met him when he was on campaign. He was not a mayor yet, and we had a long meetings and talked about it. He's very committed towards sustainable transportation. You know, this was like maybe 4 months ago, and then all of a sudden, 2 months ago, and wow, the transformation. So Vancouver is also moving forward in so many things. By the way, Vancouver is going to host Velocity Conference next year in June 26th. So people from all over the world are going to come. I hope that you do so many more wonderful things to showcase the world. So we got to think, how do we want to live? How do we want to live? That's the key thing. I know in many places we're doing things, but we're going at the speed of the turtles. And then we become like another turtle, and we say, oh, I might be slow, but I'm ahead of you. You know, the reality is that we gotta, I mean, a city like Vancouver has to benchmark itself with the best cities in the world, Vancouver and Montreal. I mean, all the cities in Canada. We just heard that Canada is one of the countries where people are happiest. We also heard that it has one of the best quality of lives. So, I mean, Canada has to benchmark, each one of the cities has to benchmark itself with cities of similar conditions, of size, but the best ones in the world. Because if we just say, oh, no, you know, we are better than all of these. Of course, I mean, all of these Canadian cities, we are much better than hundreds and thousands of cities. But if we always benchmark ourselves with cities that are worse than us, eventually we are going to be looking like those. If we benchmark ourselves with the best cities in the world, cities that are better than us for now in some things, eventually we're going to be looking like those. So we really got to realize who are we going to benchmark. And that's one of the things I love about Vancouver now. They said, we're going to be the most sustainable city in the world in 2020. They don't say that we're going to be the most sustainable in BC or the most sustainable in Canada. No, it's the most sustainable in the world. So to be really ambitious and bold and get everybody moving in that direction. So we say, how do we want to live? You know, it's not just telling people don't waste a liter of gas to get a liter of milk. If we don't have a place to get that liter of milk less than 5 kilometers away, it has to be within walking distance. You know, the park, where do we have the park structure? Do we really have a park? We're talking about increasing physical activity. Many, many studies show that the closer that you live to a park, the more likely that you're going to be physically active. So what kind of cities are we building? The schools. We're amalgamating schools all over Canada, because we see the savings. Obviously, we see instead of 2 principals, we got 1. Instead of 2 custodians, we got 1. But when the schools are bigger, the catchment area is also bigger, so more kids have to be driven to school. Their friends also live further away, so they can no longer walk or bike to see their friends. They have to be driven. So even in small distances that should be walking or cycling, because the car is for longer distances, all of a sudden, so that is a big issue. How do we want to live? When we define our cities around cars, by the way, we have been building cities for 5,000 years. In the last 40 or 60, we have been focusing more on car mobility than on people's happiness. There is not one city in the world the size of Vancouver that have solved the issue of mobility based on the private car. None. None. If that was an option, there would be hundreds of examples. There is not one. So we got to have a mix of walking and cycling and public transit and cars. When we define the cities around cars, all we get is more cars. And then we got to go out and invite our friends to help us cross the street. And this isn't far from reality. We're building the roads wider, the cars are going faster, we're living longer, so we're getting older. But when they find these cities around people, then we get more people and we get healthier and happier people. And that is the idea. We gotta have better quality of life. And quality of life is very important because we live in an ever more globalized world. And in an ever more globalized world, the best people, they can live anywhere in the world. So the best carpenters, the best medical doctors, the best engineers. So that's why we need quality of life. That's one of the great competitive advantages of Vancouver in the world, is that it has good quality of life, but it has to have even better and better and better. That's what all of the other cities want to do. So every morning we got to wake up and say, is our city today a little bit better than what it was yesterday? And if the answer is yes, and that happens day after day, week after week, year after year, we're going to have a great city. Quality of life is the most important tool of economic development. Because our main goal is how can we retain and how can we attract the best people. And that's why when I was talking about the Canadian Mobility Association, that's why it's also so important, because it has to be great for everybody, for the pedestrians and the cyclists and the transit and the cars and everybody. And when we're talking about mobility, it's about this. We gotta have cities that are, all of us are pedestrians. We're investing billions in transit all over the world, but there's not one transit system that is gonna pick us up in front of our house and drop us off in front of our destination. So if the city is not walkable or bikeable, if we cannot get to it, then it's not gonna be very good, And also similar is cycling. So, and both of them are non-motorized and they don't make any noise and so on. But if you're gonna go further away, you're gonna use transit. And then also, if maybe you're going to carry things because you're bringing the speakers here, or you're bringing the food, or you're doing deliveries, then you're going to use the cars. And then each one is going to play a role, and at the end of the day, it's how to develop vibrant city with healthy communities and sustainable mobility for all. So that is the goal that we're working on. So we start thinking, what is the role of the streets? What is the role of the streets? We do many things on the streets. The streets, it's not just about moving cars. We do festivals and the children's festivals, and we do jazz, and we do concerts, and we do all kinds of things. So why is it the role of the streets important? Because the streets, when we look at the streets from the air, at the cities from the air, the streets is the largest public space. What do you mean by public space? The space that belongs to all of us, regardless of the age or the ethnicity or the economic income or whatever. Is the space that belongs to everybody. So we got to start thinking, for example, here in Narrows, there was a river that was going right through the middle. 30 years ago, someone said, we got to move cars. So why don't we build a highway on top of this river? And that's what they did 30 years ago, because they wanted to create vibrancy. About 8 years ago, someone said, wasn't there a river going down underneath? And they brought it out. And what do you think creates more vibrancy for the city? Would you like to live in this city, or would you like to live in this one? So this is the kind of things that we are talking about. So at the end of the day, do we want to build just streets for cars or streets for people? Where you got everybody. You got the pedestrians and the cyclists and the buses and the cars. We got a complete street. Do we want our streets to look like car storage, or streets that actually create communities? We don't have to have parking on both sides. Let's put parking on one. Let's get wider sidewalks and so on. All of a sudden we do this. We say, we need car parking. But we build this ugly building that looks like a gigantic vacuum that sucks the life out of the city. But we can do the parking, but have on the street level, let's bring some vibrancy. And then we do the parking in the second, third, and fourth story. So we can still do the car parking, and everybody can get the benefits. Here we got 93 cars that were parked, and the mayor all of a sudden made it pedestrian. And these are the kind of things that we got to work on creating cities for people. So when we say what is the role of the streets, I mean, the street is the most valuable space by far, and that's going to be our biggest discussion in the public sector now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years, how to distribute that space. Clearly, pedestrians and public transit are the priority. After all, they're the most vulnerable from every point of view. And then we got to take care. Yesterday I was in Kelowna in a wonderful meeting on how to have transportation for families with children from 0 to 6. And these are some of the things that, we got to work on transit, and we got to work on making it safe. This is what I was talking about, the cyclists protecting the parked cars. That's an example. So if we're going to go one place, all of us, we could either take cars, or we could walk, or we could take a bus, or we could take bikes. So the reality is that pedestrians, cyclists, and buses take up less space. So we're going to start thinking, if the streets are the most valuable space, how are we going to use it? How are we going to distribute that space? Including chairs for coffee places, including flower shops, and so on. We got, the traditional plan is that we had a department in the city thinking on the trees and the green space, another one thinking on the cars and the mobility on the street, another one thinking on the buildings. Now we got to have a more holistic, more people-oriented from one end to the other. We got to change the way we plan cities. So let me tell you a little bit about Copenhagen. And by the way, when I'm talking about Copenhagen, people say, oh, Gil, wait a minute. We are different here. We got nothing in common with Copenhagen or New York or Bogota. We are unique. Yes, of course. Here you are unique. Always remember that you are absolutely unique. Just like everybody else. Every community is different. Even within Vancouver, every neighborhood is different, every road is different. So this is not like on the computer that we copy and paste, but we can adapt and improve. And that's the idea, how to adapt and improve. And then from that point of view, I'm just going to go briefly and tell you one single thing from each one of these cities, from Copenhagen and Odense, then Portland, Bogota, Orangeville, Seville, and New York. Copenhagen and Odense, I'm going to have a few more images than the others, but what do I mean by why Copenhagen? Because Copenhagen went through major change, and in many ways it's very similar to the Canadian cities. Actually, it's closer to the North Pole, it's similar income level, similar level of education, and they went through changes. In the 1970s, when they went through a similar crisis to the one that we're going through now, and then they said, we're not going to depend on oil again. And they started changing, and they started promoting solar energy and wind power and walking and cycling and transit. And they realized maybe it's something that we should have thought some time ago. But for example, when they were going to create the first pedestrian street, they didn't have any pedestrian streets in 1970. And they were going to create the first pedestrian street, and people say, what? Are you going to take the cars out to have people walking? First, we got too many cars. The other barrier, they said, the weather here is terrible. It's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, it rains all year round. But the number one barrier was, that's not walking, pedestrian street, that's not part of our culture. That's for the Italians. Because the Italians are loud and noisy and they like to be on the streets. But we are Danish and we are cold and quiet and we don't like to go out. Let me tell you, the Danish now are more Italian than the Italians. They love the pedestrian streets, in the rain, in the sun, in the wind. This is City Hall in Copenhagen, and all of a sudden, it used to be a parking lot, and it turned into, they went from a car invasion to people places, and they created all of this area that was the first pedestrian street. But, the people, the citizens participated. They were going out, and maybe we don't need to do this in 2011. Maybe in 2011, this is through the internet. But the citizens cannot be spectators any longer. The citizens got to go to the radio station, have to go to the public meetings. When the CAA invites to a wonderful meeting, people have to come and talk and express their ideas and so on. And this is how to make it nice for the pedestrians and the cyclists and the car and the transit and everybody else. Look at the cyclists, what has happened in the last 40 years in Copenhagen. Look at when people say, oh, they have always biked. No, in the 1960s and 70s, fewer people and fewer. But look in the last 40 years what has happened. This is one of the entrances into the city center. Cycling has doubled since the 1990s. So when people say who should be biking in Vancouver, this. When we get little girls and women and older adults and so on, and they got these problems, traffic jams. But what a nice problem to have or to try to solve if you are a politician. But again, this is the grid. Inside each one of those squares, you got to lower the speeds. But the arterials, you need a grid. If you don't have a protected grid, where all of your trip is going to be safe. People are not going to bike if 70% of the ride is safe, but 30% is in the middle of the car. So we need the grid. That's why they got 40%. 4 out of 10 people use their bike as the mode of transportation. So it's really, really interesting. And by the way, they got bumps on the neighborhoods. We got to slow down. Every neighborhood across Canada, we got to slow the speed below 30K in everyone. Why 30K? It's not a magic number. 30K because we walk at around 5 kilometers. We bike at around 15. So when the cars are going at 25, 30, 20, we feel comfortable. But when the cars are going at 40 or 50, we do not feel comfortable. So that is very important. Another reason, the children. There are many studies that the children do not perceive how fast the cars are coming if they come at more than 30K an hour. When they're under 30K, they actually can plan and realize. And also, it kills. You know, when you are hit by a car at 20 miles, there's 5% of probability of death. And then if all of a sudden, you put this into kilometers, 32 kilometers, 5%, and then all of a sudden, you go at 60 kilometers, there's 80%. So that is also a very, very compelling reason. So we got to slow down the neighborhoods. Then on the arterials, it's totally different. That's why we also need different. By the way, why is it that people bike in Copenhagen? You know, people were saying, recently they did a study. They said for environmental reasons, they say, oh, those Scandinavians, they are so environmental, or for exercise or financial. Look, they just did a study. They do it every 2 years, 1% because of environmental reasons. And then 6% financial reasons, and they got almost 1 out of 5 because of exercise and health. But the majority is because it's easy, it's fast, it's convenient. What do they mean by easy, fast, and convenient? That they got a safe infrastructure, a great infrastructure that is safe. And it's also more egalitarian and democracy work. They're thinking of everybody. And, you know, they're thinking the little children. You know, this is really, really nice how, even though the children, since they are 2 months old, they're on a bike. Nevertheless, when they are in 5th grade, they got to go to a training 3 weeks on how to be a pedestrian, how to be a cyclist. Also, they learn since they're small how to share the roads. And this is some of the things that of cycling in Copenhagen. 70% of the people that bike in the summer, they bike when it's snowing. 70%. But it's because they plow the sidewalks, they plow the bikeways, and so on. And, you know, we got to start thinking, you know, the students, they don't have to worry about the fashion because you don't have to wear spandex and cleats. You know, as you can see, biking is not for the men 20 to 40 in spandex, but it's for everybody. And that's how the students go to party. They go to the pubs and they have a drink or two, and they come out a little tipsy, but it's safer when they're tipsy on a bike than when they're tipsy driving a car. Then they get instructions on how to get home. And then the next morning they wake up and then they go to work and they're fine. And, you know, but you know, the leading cities such as Vancouver, the leading cities in the world, they want to get even better. So they're not happy that 4 out of 10 use their bike. All over Copenhagen, you see these posters that by 2015, they want to go to 5 out of 10. So they're even pushing the limits even further. You know, and some people say traffic is terrible because of the cyclists. And then this was a video, but we changed computers, so it didn't work. But nevertheless, you can see, can you imagine if each one of those cyclists was driving a car, what would the traffic jam be like? So maybe traffic is bad is not because of the cyclists, but traffic is bad is because there are not enough cyclists. So we got to share the road with more people, you know. And it's not just the big cities. So Dens, for example, is 190,000 people. Many cities in Canada are this size, smaller cities. And they are including thinking of everybody, the young and the old and the summer and the winter. They did a sustainable transportation plan, and they included everybody, the kids going to school and the women going to work. And they use extensively internet to ask the people's opinion. And many of the roads in the downtown, the pedestrians and cyclists go in both directions. The cars go in one. And then whenever there's a lot of cars, it's physically separated, so it's safe for everybody. And counting, you know, we heard about counting. If you don't count, then you don't really count. So like this one, when I took the photo, 7,803 cyclists had gone by, and then they got air all over the city and nice signage and understanding and so on, lockers that you could put in your backpack and then go and have a cappuccino, public washrooms in the public spaces, and then a city of 190,000 people, and look at this underground bicycle parking. Fantastic. You know, this is really respecting people. And when you go to the pedestrian places, either you leave your bike out or you walk with your bike because pedestrians are first. Pedestrians are the most vulnerable. And by the way, the traffic lights here, as in many other arterials now in Copenhagen as well, are at the speed of the bicycle, not at the speed of the car. So like here, the green wave is at 22 kilometers. So when you are going on your bike here, there is a sensor that is telling you how fast you are going. And then let's say the green wave, we said it was at 22, and you are going at 18, so you got to speed up if you want to catch all the traffic lights in green. And I asked the Transportation Commission, and I said, so, you know, what does it really matter, you know, if you 3 minutes more, 3 minutes less? And he said, Gil, you didn't get it. This is not about the 3 minutes. This is about sending a message that a person on a $40 bike is as important as a person on a $40,000 car. So it's the message, you know. The reality is that when we build infrastructure for pedestrians and for cyclists, it's a symbol of the respect for people. So it is really, really important. Portland, we heard wonderful things about Portland this morning. I just want to add one little thing about Portland. Portland, they have done the most bicycle lanes in the world. And initially, they went from 1% to 2 to 3 to 4. And then when they reached 6%, it pretty much flattened and started going. So they said, what happened? Last year, they did a wonderful study that is applicable to any city in Canada. What is the study? They said, look, assume that in your city, this is the whole population. This is the population bar. They found that there is the red line, like 1%, they call it the strong and the fearless. These people, when you build infrastructure, you're going to build for this 1%, don't waste your money. You don't need to build anything for them, Some of them are not very polite, such as this guy. Some are a lady like this one, but nevertheless, even if you build infrastructure, this guy is not going to use it. They are the kamikazes. Then on the other side, there's a third of the population that you can build the best infrastructure ever. They're still not going to bike, What do they look like? Well, Fergie, she won't bike. Paris Hilton probably, she won't bike it. Even their friend that they took away her driver's license because she drank too much, she won't bike either. So that's the 1/3 of the population. But there is 5 or 6% that they're enthusiastic and confident. If you build something, especially young people, students, you go near the universities, U of T or UBC or wherever you go, the students, the young people, mostly young and mostly men, if you do, but that's 6%. So even if you are very, very successful and you reach half of those 6%, you got only 3% of the population. But what they found in Portland is that the majority of population are interested but are concerned. So they want is to find a way so that it's safe for everybody. So they said, okay, they started creating these bike boulevards that now they call the greenways, and they said, on arterials, people want physical separation between the pedestrians, the cyclists, and the cars. It has to be safe for everybody, and then people are going to use them. So when we're building infrastructure in any of our cities, what is our target? I think our target should be the guy in the winter or the woman in the spring, the older adults. Then we're going to think of the families, and we're going to think of everybody. And the older adults, the people going to work. And we're going to think also of these ones, the 97% that are not biking because they don't feel safe. So we got to really work on that. Pedestrians, we walk at 5K, and we bike at around 15, and the cars go at more than 40 on arterial. So each one needs separate facilities when they're going at such different speeds. Now, the second international example I want to show about Bogota. In Bogota, I'm going to talk not because I was commissioner of Parks and Recreation or because one of my brothers became mayor afterwards, but because Bogota, it has 1/8 the per capita income. And by the way, I hear everywhere I go, always I hear the question, how do the cities get the money? What is the Look, I haven't seen in any city that has done a major transformation for cycling or for pedestrian where the money has been an issue. None. The only places where the money is an issue is where they haven't done anything. So they use money as an excuse. Oh, we're going through an economic crisis, we cannot do this. I mean, in Toronto, we're doing a little bit of subway in the northern part, hired by the last administration, 8 kilometers, 2.6 billion. 2.6 billion to carry maybe 60,000 people a day, nothing. They could have put those 60,000 people on a BRT for 115, and with that money, they could have done protected byways for every city in Ontario. So money is not the issue. But nevertheless, look at this. Obviously, I'm not saying that Bogota is the same league as the Canadian cities. I wish. It's years behind. But nevertheless, in 3 years, we built 280 kilometers of physically separated byways and went from 28,000 to over 300,000 people biking every day. And these are some of them or in areas that are the developers are still building. These are more consolidated areas, others that are more urban, such as these ones. So always separating the pedestrians and the cyclists and creating the grid. And in some of the places, they are so poor that even if your worst nightmare you couldn't think of in Vancouver. No sidewalks, no pavement, but nevertheless, look at the quality of the pedestrian and the cycling areas. So we got to be consistent. If we say pedestrians first and then cyclists, then someday they're going to pave the road. But we didn't have the money for all of it, so either we did walking and cycling, okay. And then look at how happy that little girl is. And then this other one, the mother, 3-in-1, she's taking her 2 kids to school. And then this is where the city is growing. So even before the first road goes in, there is a promenade of 34 kilometers going all across. So these are some of the things. It's about priorities. It's about priorities when we start thinking, what is the role of the pedestrian, the cyclist, and the car, and so on. And this is another thing, the Ciclovia. The Ciclovia in Bogota, we took a small program and we opened the streets to the people on Sundays. So on Sunday, we take a grid of roads from 7 a.m. till 2 p.m., and we open it. We leave the cars on both sides, but not in the middle road. And all of a sudden, people come out to walk or bike or skate, and we develop a grid. We interconnected the parks, and like here, we went from 13 kilometers to 91 to over 121, and we start getting all of these people. And along the route, we do aerobics or painting or other things. And this is an idea that has caught on, and we have brought it to many other cities in the last 3 years, to Portland and New York and Atlanta and many other places. Ottawa has a really nice plan many, many years ago. And we get, in a city of 7 million people, every Sunday, 1.3 million people come out. So more than anything is to create an idea that you can use the streets in many other ways. But let me tell you another example, Orangeville and Milton, because sometimes we say, oh, it's about infrastructure. No, it's about leadership. And when we talk about leadership, we tend to think of these world leaders. But no, I'm going to tell you about another one, Ann Fenton. Ann is a physical education teacher in Orangeville. And Ann was very worried that each year, fewer and fewer kids were walking to school. And then she did a survey. Why is it that you're not walking to school? Because they were afraid of the cars. People are coming late to school, and so then they're late to work, and they're driving like crazy. Can you imagine the quality of the air in our schools? So that is one of the things. So then when the kids were on holidays 2 summers ago, then all of a sudden she changed, and the kids came back, and she was dressed up as a pylon. Wonderful. She was dressed up as a pylon, and she shut down the school parking lot. So no cars could go in. So instead of all the cars coming to one place, she created 5 drop-off zones. So people can use their cars, but not everybody coming to the school. So they chose 5 parking lots within 500 meters from the school. And then all of a sudden, the kids started walking. And it was minus 25 degrees. So it's not that say, oh, no, it's in the middle of the Caribbean. No, it was cold. So these are some of the things. We need hundreds of Ann Fentons to create spaces, So it's programs. Joyce, she's in Milton, Ontario. And in Milton, Ontario, she's the vice principal of an elementary. And she started doing a walkability plan. And people say, oh, Joyce, are you crazy? Don't waste your time. Most of the kids coming here are immigrants. And they're immigrants from countries where the weather is very hot. So people are not going to walk. And then she said, but champions, they don't take no for an answer. They keep going and not going and not. Look at this, how hostile these roads in front of the school. You barely see the pedestrian, you barely see the cyclists. This is in front of the school, 40 kilometers an hour, 20-meter wide road. But she started doing her plan, and she started doing her promotion. Now she has 83% of the kids walking to school, 83%. And then those immigrants that wouldn't walk are walking, and their parents that would not participate are volunteering in the walking buses and so on. So this is something that is great, So we need better hardware, but we need better software. What I mean is that we need infrastructure, but we also need programs. So they got to go hand in hand, both of them. The next example is Seville. Why am I talking about Seville? Because Seville is very interesting, very similar to many Canadian cities. Actually, we think the Spanish, all they do is siesta. Their Spanish yoga. But no, this guy, Jose Garcia, here he is with the three of the people with the 880 cities in Seville. And they did something wonderful. In 2006, not 40 years ago, no, 4 years ago, they had 750,000 people. No one biked, no one. Not even 0.5%, 0.2%. No protected bikeways. And all of a sudden, they built a grid of 150 kilometers. This is why I believe so much in the bicycle. When you build a bikeway infrastructure, then all of a sudden people start biking. No, it's not perfect. They got to improve some intersections. They got to improve some things. But nevertheless, when they created this separation, I don't know what happened in that computer, but can you click on the X because it's not? Thank you. Then, the bike share went from 0.2 to 6.6, which is more than any city in North America except Portland. And then they started doing, when they had these little things not connected, no one was using, but then they started creating the network, and they are creating more and more network and more connections, and all of a sudden, that's when people started using the bikes, and that's when people started, of all ages. By the way, before this, in 2006, they had 86% were men, 14% were women. Now, 48% are women, 52% men. So it's almost like a 50-50 split. So when someone was saying about the role of the women, they put also bicycle parking and bike station and public bikes and so on. But that is like the icing on the cake. Once you have the infrastructure, it's not to put this before the infrastructure. And these are some of the examples of some of the things that they did. And then you start thinking, okay, well, where did they get this space? Part of it, moving the parked cars to the side. New York, we saw the video from New York that is great, so I'm not going to stop very long. I thought the only way to see New York from the streets was running the marathon, but you don't have to do it because you got this woman, Janet Sari-Khan, the Commissioner of Transportation, and her pal, Amanda Burden, the Commissioner of Planning. They went to Copenhagen, they came back to New York. They saw places like 9th Avenue, cars on one side, on the other, the cyclists, and then they said, we're going to create areas for pedestrians, for cyclists, a separate, and also for cars, for everybody. And then all of a sudden, not 30 months later, not 30 weeks later, but in 30 days, they did this. And going from this to this is not about the money. It's not a technical issue, it's a political one. It's how to get the political will to actually do these things. Broadway, 2 years ago, Broadway, who was using the bike lanes? The kamikazes and some cars. And then all of a sudden, so Janet, a year and a half ago, she started painting two areas for pedestrians, for cyclists, and creating areas for everybody. And then all of a sudden, it's just a little bit of paint and umbrellas. And this is Broadway in Times Square. If anybody thought 5 years ago would have said in New York that the Times Square is going to be pedestrian, they would have thought you were crazy. Well, that's what they did. All of it. There's 8 blocks in front of Times Square. This is what it looks like. So people are changing, and we got to realize, and it's not because Mayor Bloomberg has money left over or because he's going crazy. By the way, Mayor Bloomberg is Republican, he's very business, he's right wing. In Portland, the mayor is left wing. So this is not about left or right. It's about doing things that are good for the cities, how to create cities for people. This is not one political party or another. And they also did their Sunday, they call it Summer Streets. And not in just an isolated road. No, they did it on Park Avenue, 8 lanes on both sides of Park Avenue, and they were doing it. And they were creating areas also for pedestrians and so on. So these are some of the examples of New York. So that's why I say we need a Janet Sari-Khan in every city. We need someone because she finds solutions to the problems and not problems to the solutions. So why am I saying that this is a perfect opportunity despite all of these problems that we're having? Because in many ways the stars are getting aligned. In many ways some of the problems that we're having are problems that help us move things forward. And by the way, when we are talking about this, when we say we got to have really nice infrastructure for everybody, when we're talking about the complete streets that the person from TICAD was talking about this morning, it's almost like a human right. It's the right to mobility. And some people say, okay, but here everybody drives. No. Even in the wealthiest neighborhood of Vancouver, even in the wealthiest and most sprawled neighborhood of Surrey, at least 30 or 40% of the people do not drive. Everyone under 17, they don't drive. 30% of the over 60, they don't drive. And if the neighborhood is not as wealthy or as sprawled, then it's not going to be 40%, it's going to be 50 or 60 or 70%, By the way, let's keep in mind that bikeways do not exist in isolation. It's a bicycle network. So we got to think outside the box. There are some challenges, but more than challenges, we got wonderful opportunities. And like Bernard Shaw said, you see things and you say, why? But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? And the other day I was at the University of Waterloo, and I saw, the same quote, but they're really focusing on the spirit of the why not. And that's what we got to say. Why not? Why cannot have more cities for people? And we got to remember that cycling and pedestrian is a symbol of the respect for people. We got to build broader alliances between the private sector and the public sector, between the municipalities and the province and the federal government and the departments of public health and the environment and transportation and urban planning, between the Canadian Automobile Association and the bicycle associations and the pedestrians association and the public transit associations, and everybody got to work together on how to make the cities more competitive, how to make the communities more healthy, and so on. And like Einstein used to say, life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. So we got to keep moving. And this is a new Einstein. Some people say, you have to keep going. That's what Tina Fey says. But it's not about the money, and it's not a technical issue. It is a political why. That's why we need to have the sense of urgency, and we need to have the political will where the general interest prevails over the particular. We got to have the doers in the public sector that know that every other week we are paying them a salary to get things done, not to have 20 reasons why things cannot be done. We got to have leadership like Ann Fenton, hundreds of Ann Fentons, and we got to have public engagement. The citizens got to realize that if they're not making the phone calls to the elected officials, if they're not writing the letters to the editor, if they're not going to the public meetings, someone else is, and that someone else is setting the agenda. So I'd like to conclude by saying that the ducks are in a row, and we have been focusing too much on doing things right. But now, in addition of doing things right, we also got to do the right thing. So thank you very much.